this is kind of where I realized that, like, Tim Ferriss has this phrase that like reality is negotiable. The rules that you see that like people are writing down, and the kinds of like things that you're supposed to abide by, these are all suggestions. These are not rules. These are suggestions. And you can, if you're willing to question that, and if you're willing to ask more than often or not, reality can bend to your will. No, I think that's a good place to start. For me, I think the turning point was when I went to this international school, UWC, Costa Rica. So picture this: I'm a kid from South Africa, grew up in post-apartheid South Africa. So basically, the country is still trying to figure out, how do you transition away from this dictatorship that we've been under, essentially. And there's a lot of like things aren't perfect. Basically, it's not like the biggest struggles weren't trying to like fit in school and stuff. But at that time, it was just normal. Like my childhood was normal. We didn't think anything of it. And then, so growing up in South Africa, then I when I was 17, I moved across the world to go and live and study in Costa Rica. And I think that was the main catalyst to me getting into self-development and trying to understand how can you like master yourself. Because I think when you're in an environment where at such a young age, you're completely on your own and you have to decide, how do you want to live your life, essentially, that independence is kind of thrust upon you. I think a lot of, Americans experience this when they go to college. And so it happened a little earlier in my life. And yeah, I think that period of time where you don't have anyone telling you what to do. You basically in charge of everything.
You're coming from, sorry to cut you off, but an all boys school in South Africa, and they're just, we're going to unleash you in a country where you don't speak the language with a bunch of other international students.
Yeah.
Girls, guys, I can't imagine what's going through your head. You're like, this is crazy freedom.
And the thing about like the school that I went to in South Africa, I'm not sure if you guys have these in the US, but they're kind of like remnants of like the British schooling system, where it's like everyone's wearing a uniform. There's a lot of strict rules. There's like a very set hierarchy among the students. So for example, like when I was in grade 8, you had to go and like do chores and do like run errands for the people who were in grade 12, who were the seniors. And it was like worse if you were in the boarding school. So I was just a day scholar. I used to travel to school every day. But if you're in the boarding school, then you'll have to like, clean their room, or like, it's basically like a means of, getting respect and moving up the ladder. So to go from that very like structured hierarchical environment to UWC, which is very much like, oh guys, education can save the world, and like, let's all just respect each other. And like, it's very like, new agey and kumbaya around the campfire kind of stuff. But I think that whole experience just taught me that, look, like, I loved reading at a young age as well. And so at that time, whatever issues I would have, I would turn to books or to resources to try and like solve that, because that was like the only thing that I knew. It's like, okay, I have a problem, let's try and find out something about how you can solve it. And I think that year, at my first year when I was in Costa Rica, so I came there when I was 17, didn't speak any Spanish, sort of trying to find myself and where I am in the world and my place in the world. That year was like super transformative to me. I managed to get my health in check, lost like, I think it was like 50 pounds or so.
Yeah, that was the other thing.
So that was like, and so when I met Henry, it was at the end of this first year of like immense transformation and basically like just finding a lot of self-esteem and confidence in myself and my abilities and basically assuredness in the fact that like I can be effective in the world, and I can like execute without relying, basically self-reliability. That's the word I would use. And so obviously, cool. and so when I met you, I think I was like at the end of that phase. So it looks like, this person has it all put together.
You were so wise. I remember there were a few people in our cohort that were like getting in trouble for sneaking alcohol in, to, like, the different things. And Avthar's just like, he's like, I can't even explain it. You had your shit together. That's what it was. And it was,
that's true.
It shone so bright.
I appreciate that though, man. Thank you. I must say, like, my first impression of Henry, I was like, at first I was kind of jealous because like at that time he had like this vitamin company. And I was like, damn, this guy is so young and he already has a company and it's like got this cool social mission. So I think it goes both ways, right?
Enron of a company right there. You had to get out of that. That was
so we should. I sent Dylan this morning. He asked me about a week ago he wanted to see the Shark Tank video, and I couldn't find it. It was on some older computer, but I found it this morning, unlisted on YouTube. So that'll surface somewhere. But Avthar, we should talk about how we ended up, or basically what the African Leadership Academy was, because that was, for me, their curriculum on entrepreneurial leadership was like such a kick in the butt. So you had figured out
a lot of the lessons, exactly. A lot of like the lessons that we learned there was actually really, really good. A lot of the things actually stayed with me until this day. In fact, I should actually try and dig up my old, I still have the leadership journal, like the binder that they had, and we would reflect in things. Coincidentally, I actually got to know Veda pretty well. He's also a Princeton alum, and so we've met subsequently to the end of that camp. That was
actually he would be an awesome person to talk to on here. But
he actually has his own podcast now, so I can introduce you guys.
That would be super cool. Well, I talked with him, so I should just do that.
Yeah,
I saw him in San Francisco not too long ago. But now this is the Avthar Henry Veda show. Veda was the
he was basically like the head facilitator in the camp,
and he also kind of came up with the curriculum. He was like in on the founding table of the African Leadership Academy. So yeah, Dylan, we met there. It was 2013, and it was this awesome summer course on entrepreneurial leadership. And it was, at the time, they were teaching a lot of kind of unconventional things.
Exactly.
They were ahead
especially
of the curve.
for kids at like that young age. A lot of it was about, so like the thesis of that camp was, I think it was called a Global Scholars Program.
Mm-hmm.
So you bring in both students from Africa. So I was one of the African students, even though I was in Costa Rica when I applied. So you have a portion of students who are from Africa and some students who are actually students at the school African Leadership Academy. And then you have these other students from some are Americans and some are from like the UK and other countries. We even had one guy from China as well. He came like halfway late.
Yeah,
so there's
I
people
remember.
not supposed to come there. And the idea is to try and equip them with some entrepreneurship and leadership skills, and also teach them about like Africa and the potential that entrepreneurship has to transform the African continent. And I think that was my takeaway, because at that time, one of the things that I realized when I was at UWC is that like I really love South Africa, and the other African students and I became very close. There was only about 5 of us or so. There was a very about 5, 7, basically like a handful of us, and we got really tight. And so naturally, this whole idea of like, look, a lot of African countries share similar problems, weak institutions, weak leadership, corruption. And so how is it possible to train a set of young people? And their hypothesis is that leadership is a thing that's missing. And so if you have good leadership, then that will actually create stronger institutions and decrease corruption and stuff like that. And so that was the premise of this whole school, and this whole summer camp was to basically teach that, but like at a micro level in the 6 weeks or 8 weeks.
And the problem too, Avthar, was you could teach leadership on the continent, right? And because all of the top students from the continent would end up coming to the States to go to whatever institutions, and they would go to Ivy League schools here, and then they would stay here, right? It was that idea of brain drain. And so the African leadership's position is, okay, if you come here for boarding school for 2 years, it's all those things Avthar talked about, but also if you go away for school, you have to come back and serve and build organizations on the African continent for I think 10 years. Yeah, for 10 years.
Yeah, like after, I think 10 years after you graduate, within that time, you have to dedicate like a period of your working career.
What's interesting
I think it's part of the scholarship that they get.
Exactly, right. The bummer is I know a few people who have kind of broken that contract and elected to pay.
Oh, very interesting. Okay.
And stay in the States. And so I don't know how well it's working. We should talk to Veda, but that's
a whole topic for another day. One of my friends who was one of the first groups of students at the school was just talking a little bit about, I think once you get out of it, you kind of see through the matrix and you're like, well, I think that the whole vision and the goal is good, but there are some things that might leave you a bit disenchanted. And that whole returning policy is a controversial topic, at least among the students.
It's cool. Like, I think few people get into this like heavy entrepreneurship, going out and exploring new worlds at such a young age. So that's why it's amazing that you two could do that. For Avthar, was that like your parents kind of wanted you to do this, or did you hear about, say, United World College or whatever? Like, how did you stumble into these worlds?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. My parents haven't forced me to do anything in life. I think it's very like, when I think back at it, my parents have been very much letting me pick the things that I'm interested in, and then as I've picked them, they've been just super supportive of it. And so the story of how I came across UWC and even ALA is that when I was younger, I was super interested in maths and science, and so I got selected to go for these like science Olympiads. So I represented South Africa at International Science Olympiad in Nigeria when I was like 15, I think. And then similarly, I represented South Africa again at this International Physics Olympiad when I was 17. And so those experiences, especially the first one when I was in Nigeria, was so like formative to me, because at that time it was my first exposure to people from different countries in the world. And we're all at an age where, when you're 15, you're still like nice. You're still like a kid in the sense that like, you haven't like fully formed your ideas of the world, but you have enough understanding of your own culture and your own country that you can share that with other people. So you're receptive, but you also have something to bring. And that whole experience was really life-changing for me. I've made friends that I still keep in touch with today. I think when you, as a kid, especially like looking at the context that we were coming from, you take all these like nerdy kids who are like the best in maths and science at their school, and you bring them all together. And initially in their own countries, they think like, we're like the only people, no one really understands us. And then you come together and you're like, wow, everyone here actually likes this stuff. Everyone is cool. And so I wanted to be in that environment. So that was just like, I think it was like 2 weeks that the Olympiad was. I wanted to be in that environment for like longer. I just wanted to go back and wanted to keep having that exposure to people from different countries in the world and learning. Because I think like you hear a lot about different countries. So like everyone has heard of, this is what's happening in Brazil, this is what's happening in Indonesia. But once you meet someone from that country, it really humanizes what's going on there. And so I think that kind of like element of building empathy, such that it's not just like things that you're reading in the news, but there's actually people that you can associate with things. That was super powerful for me. And then the other thing was that like I just think that was like the first time that I realized that like the story that I have is interesting. A lot of people were fascinated by the idea that I am South African Indian, even though like South Africa is a predominantly Black country. A lot of we had people on a team that were Indian. We had white people, Black people, and so it was like a microcosm of like the racial mix-up of South Africa. And people were kind of confused at that because they don't necessarily see that in the things that they're watching on TV or things that they're reading about. And so I like that, and I kind of like wanted to share more about what life is like, and more about my life and the things that I'm interested in. And so basically, like I got very lucky. I was researching around for what other organizations have like an international mission and things like that. And one day, the single most like life-changing thing in my life kind of happened by accident, where one day I was just in school in South Africa. I went to a public high school, and someone had went to UWC that was like a year above me or 2 years above me, and he just happened to like come and speak to my particular English class that day. It was only one class in the whole school. The school has like thousands of like more than 1,000 kids in it, 1,000 guys, and he just happened to speak to my English class that day. He didn't speak to any of the other classes, and he basically said, "Yeah, I went to the school." He went to the school in Canada, and he basically talked about how life-changing it was. It was people from different countries, and you learn this great curriculum called IB, and then he's thinking about going to university in the US. And I was like, damn, this sounds like this thing that I was looking for. It's like ideally positioned. And it so happened that the ethos of UWC was all about international understanding, sharing from your culture, but also like being a representative of your country. And at that time, I was super into debating and public speaking, and so I was very like politically aware of what was going on in South Africa, and I was able to articulate what my opinions about these things are at a level that was perhaps unusual for someone that was like 16 at the time. That mainly because I was debating, and so you learn all these arguments, you learn how to stand up and speak in front of people. And so what actually happened, that whole story, is that I went for I applied like before the applications kind of open, and so like I put my application, I sent it in, and they're like, sorry, like you have to wait until next year. And so anyway, I managed to go through that whole application process. What's actually funny is that I didn't actually finish the whole thing. So what happens is that you apply, and then if they think that you can kind of handle the whole experience, they take you to like a regional selection. You can think of this kind of like in your state. So each province in South Africa has their group of like 10 kids or so, and they come and they interview you, and you talk among the other kids. And it's kind of trying to see, can you, one, are you able to like socially adapt to uncomfortable situations, but also like how well can you hold your own in a foreign environment? Because, in addition to going to places that you have that you don't speak the language, can you make friends? Are you like sociable? Can you survive socially in that environment is another thing. And so I just went through this first part. What then happens is you take all the people who are the winners of their regional groups, and then you take them to like the national stage. And so you have like a camp, and then they select the people that get the scholarships. Now, what happened to me is that I actually didn't go through the second phase. I just went to the first phase, and then I was I had to go to this debating tournament. So it was one of my first international tournaments. It was in Slovakia at the time. And so at the time that this thing happened, they called me and they're like, oh, can you come to Johannesburg this weekend? So I live in this place called Pietermaritzburg. It's like 6 hours away from Johannesburg. Can you come to Johannesburg this weekend? We need you to come for this national selection. So I was super happy. But then also like I was leaving the next day to go to this debating tournament. And so I was kind of sad at that point, because I was like, this is a thing that like, it's really going to change my life. But at the same time, I already committed to this this tournament. I was going to represent South Africa there. And this is kind of where I realized that like, Tim Ferriss has this phrase that like reality is negotiable. The rules that you see that like people are writing down, and, the kinds of like things that you're supposed to abide by, these are all suggestions. These are not rules. These are suggestions. And you can, if you're willing to question that, and if you're willing to ask more than often or not, reality can bend to your will. And so this basically what happened was that I kind of get this from my mother as well. My mother is probably one of the most proactive people that I know. Super organizer, super like planning things, and like she's basically like, she'll be a great like chief operations officer. Like in my ideal company, amazing at like organizing things. And so she was like, why don't you send them an email and say, look, you representing South Africa at this debate thing. It's not like you're, sitting at home and like you don't want to come. And so eventually they managed to reschedule it such that the day after the day that I landed back in South Africa after this debate tournament, the people who are like on the committee met me in this hotel. So I had to get from the airport to this like random hotel in Johannesburg. Keep in mind, I don't live in the city, so I don't know where anything is. So I made my way to this hotel and went and met these people. And fortunately, I done like well at the tournament. I think I came second or something like that, like individually, and we'd reached the final. So we did pretty well. And so I was in like a talkative mood and a happy mood. I was kind of nervous because like we were just in like a hotel conference room. It was kind of like all the atmosphere and thing had been taken out, and it was just me and these like three people. I think they were probably in business or something like that. And then fortunately, that's how I got in. And so a lot of it is basically luck. Most of the good things that have happened in my life are lucky. But I think
not
also
so much so.
But also it shows you that like when opportunities come, I was like well prepared for that particular opportunity. And I think this is where it's like there's a phrase that Naval has, which is like you got to find who and what needs you the most in the world. And I think that like a lot of the time people want things, But like what I wanted at that age in life, like when I went to the Science Olympiad, was to go and study at Cambridge or Oxford, because I felt like that was what smart people did at that time. But my particular route to getting and my way of doing things in life, I've never done it the traditional way of like, oh, you do well in school and then you go to university. I've always done like the kind of like side road way, and UWC was like a good example of that, where I actually had to leave South Africa and then go and do 2 years at this school, and then I ended up in university. And so it was always like, life doesn't, you can have these plans and you can have these like things that you want to achieve, but these kind of serendipitous opportunities are sometimes the best ways to actually achieve those overall goals that you have.